Pakistan is very difficult to deal with. They're paranoid. They essentially, they don't know who's coming after them, and so they're worried about the Indians. They're worried about they're worried about Afghanistan. Mark is right. They have a weak civilian government that hasn't paid enough attention to their own people, developed their own economy. We do provide aid, that's leverage. We do provide military assistance, that's leverage. But you have to continue to go there, and you got to keep pushing them, because the problem is that while they say they worry about terrorism, and after all, terrorism in Pakistan has killed more of their own people than terrorism elsewhere. I mean, it has. You see attacks going on every day. And my point to them was, look, we're dealing with a common enemy here, which are terrorists. So why shouldn't why shouldn't you go after the terrorists? The problem is they've used terrorism as leverage. They deal with some terrorists as leverage in dealing with India. They deal with some terrorists as leverage in dealing with Afghanistan. They use that. And the result is we can't trust them then in this whole area. But having said all of that, they're in a key position. They're important to our relationship with India. They're important to our relationship with Afghanistan. They do have nuclear weapons. Our concern has always been that those nuclear weapons could wind up in the hands of terrorists, and that still remains a real concern. So we have got to do everything we can to make sure that that country is stable.
And in assessing the relative nuclear threat, is Pakistan more of a concern to you than Iran?
Well, Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, and Pakistan does. And they're developing more weapons as we speak. And that's a concern. The security of those weapons, in my book, is a principal concern.
And there's attention paid to that, and I'll leave it there, just to assure the audience tonight. One other thing I would add, and Leon and I have heard this a lot from the Pakistanis over the last 10 years we've been in Afghanistan. Well, you're not going to stay forever, so how do we trust you? This is the Pakistanis talking to us, and are you going to protect us? Are you going to keep our interests in mind? Because India is playing around in Afghanistan. You get these regional politics. Well, we are now leaving the area. We still have 50,000 troops in Afghanistan, but we're on path to move out of Afghanistan, and the Secretary is a big part of that overall plan. But it'd be interesting to see what Pakistan does, because they're going to be a little bit like that teenager in your household who complains about the rules and the way in which you want them to behave, but they really don't want you to kick them out of the house. And it's going to be an interesting, and maybe there's some hope. Now the new Army Chief, Kayani, who we all trust, and
he's a good man.
Further than some of the other Pakistanis, he's going to step down. And Leon, I know you're going to watch, and I'll watch who this new candidate is.
The reason it's critical is Afghanistan, the ability to secure and make sure that Afghanistan can govern itself. We think that. We've done an awful lot to train their forces. We've done an awful lot to try to train their capability to be able to provide some stability in Afghanistan. But if the security of Afghanistan is in many ways largely dependent on Pakistan, because that is where terrorists usually come from that create instability in Afghanistan. So if we're going to have stability in Afghanistan, we have got to have stability in Pakistan.
Well, let's end in the region there by talking about Afghanistan for a second. You were instrumental in scaling down. Next year is an incredibly important year. As you look back, for both of you, what has gone well with our involvement in Afghanistan, and then what has not gone well?
Well, I think what has gone well there is that, first and foremost, we went into Afghanistan right after 9/11, and as a result of that, Al-Qaeda that was present in Afghanistan moved off into the tribal areas of Pakistan, and basically we undermined at least a lot of their base of operations in Afghanistan. Secondly, we have done an awful lot to train and equip that that force there. And the fact is that they now, the Afghans, are in charge of combat operations. We're there, we're providing support, but the reality is that they are now doing the combat operations in Afghanistan and doing them well, by the way. So that has been important, and that has gone right. I think what's gone wrong, I mean, first of all, there was this gap when we focused on Afghanistan, then we went to Iraq, and I think that created a gap. And very frankly, there were a lot of questions raised about the United States and our, whether we're really going to be there to support the country. So that set us off on the wrong foot with some of the Afghans. The other thing is that the more we can do to try to talk about the corruption that goes on, that undermines their ability to really govern their country, that is something that we've tried to focus on, but frankly we haven't done a very good job trying to move it in the right direction.
Can either of you envision a Taliban negotiated peace treaty?
Yes.
Do you think that's real? That's a possibility?
It's a possibility. They're war weary. They have different elements in the Taliban community. There are those who see a political way forward, but it will depend on what the Secretary just described, which is an Afghan security force, which includes both the police and the army, that can enforce some discipline, enforce security, and make it clear to the Taliban that they can continue to fight this low-level, in some cases high-level, war, but they won't prevail. And in the meantime, their families suffer. The Taliban, they've taken real hits, and the country itself, of course, has been in perpetual war now for almost 30 years. Yeah. So that's again why it's so important to have stood up the Afghan security forces. Now, one of the things that hasn't always gone well in Afghanistan are the domestic politics, and Hamid Karzai is designed to give American leaders headaches about every other week, and he overplays his domestic political needs, I think. But
do you believe he's corrupt?
I might leave that to Leon, but he's very westernized. He's a wonderful guy to sit with and have tea in this big palace, and then you walk out, an hour later he calls a press conference and says, "I want the Americans to leave right now." After we've lost, and this is now it's less than funny. After we've put our own soldiers on the line, and we've lost our own Americans there defending and building that country. There's an election coming next year. It's going to be really important that election is transparent and is well run, and they will have a new president. It's probably not going to be like one of our elections, although who knows? But it's still.
At least their government's open, right?
And again, I'm going to riff for just, one of the reasons what we did these last few weeks is not helpful, is you've got dictators and anti-democracy elements and skeptics all over the world watching us, and we tell them democracy works and we move our country forward. This is a bad message and a bad example to set. It's again why I want to plead with some in the Congress who want to shut the government down rather than govern.
And
sorry, I had to.
And just before we leave Afghanistan, since you did raise the corruption issue, and since you're out of office now, is Karzai corrupt? We hear all these stories about graft, him personally.
Well, look, let me tell you, the nature of these countries is that corruption is rampant. That's how they do business. And they all do business that way. They get money from different elements there in order, people who govern at the local level engage in that, people who govern at the national level.
So the answer is yes?
He's been known to, get some assistance in the work that he's done. Having said that, he also recognizes that this is going to have to be dealt with if that country is going to be successful. Look, we are dealing with a tribal country. Let's not kid anybody. Even in dealing with other countries in the Middle East, the concept that somehow they're going to become Jeffersonian Democrats is a little crazy. The best you can hope for is stability, and that they are able ultimately to develop the elements of governance that give people a little more participation. But it's a tribal society. There's a lot of suspicions. Goes back in history a long way. and to try to get those tribes to suddenly work with one another, to recognize that there is a larger country in Afghanistan that they have to work for, that is going to be the test of whether or not they make it.
Okay.
Let me say one other thing here. The challenge we had with Afghanistan is we had a series of one-year plans over a 10-year time frame, and it's what is, and we need to keep moving forward. But I think the broader point to make is that as we move forward in this new security world, global challenges that we have, we've got to be really clear-eyed. I think we've got to combine a Wilsonian and Nixonian approach. And we've got to be realistic about these countries. We have to understand that they are tribal, that they don't necessarily have the civic institutions that we take for granted in our country. And I don't believe we are going to, in the near term, medium term, or the long term, ever invade a country like Iraq again with the idea that we're going to stand up a democratic society overnight. And that was, to me, a mistake of significant size. I didn't think that was an adventure on which we should embark. And when we did embark on that adventure, we turned our backs on Afghanistan, and I think we lost an opportunity to really build that country in a way that we would be certain that it's going to thrive going forward. The jury is out on what's going to happen in Afghanistan. You remember that we're going to, rather than fight them here, fight them there. And we went to Iraq, and I said, what are we doing? They're in the Fatah. They're in Afghanistan. Let's go there and fight them. Let's go there and wipe them out. Why are we going to Iraq? But anyway, I had to get that off my chest. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Had to get that off my chest.
Let's take a different topic here, national security disclosures, which obviously gets involved with the media. We are in this struggle, as we always are, of trying to balance the people's right to know with protecting national security secrets. We've had really high-profile leaks, the Snowden leaks, the WikiLeaks. We have a situation where James Risen of the New York Times appears to be headed to jail because he refuses to disclose to prosecutors the source of some national security information. I want to start with Secretary Panetta. You, for much of your career, you have had access to national security information, classified information, certainly as Defense Secretary, CIA Director, and I would guess you sat in on intelligence briefings when you were Chief of Staff. I'm wondering, have you, in your entire career, being a friend to many reporters, have you ever either disclosed classified information or had or had discussions about classified information?
Should have brought my lawyer tonight. No, the answer is no. No.
I ask this question because it's actually a serious one, because some of the people that scream loudest about national security leaks are leakers when it suits their interests. I mean, if we read Bob Woodward's book about the path to war in Iraq, it's incredible where the information came from. So I wonder, what is the balance here?
Well, you know, it's the challenge that that we all have. The leaders in Washington have to ensure that we secure our country and at the same time respect our constitutional rights and our freedoms, and to be able to balance those two important objectives. I think you can do it. I really do believe that at the same time that we keep our country safe, that we can also do it in a way that protects our freedoms. We have to put this in the context of what happened on 9/11. 9/11 was a brutal attack on the United States, killing 3,000 or more innocent people. And we went to war. We went to war as a result of 9/11, going after Al-Qaeda and the people involved who conducted that attack. And so the issue then was to make sure that that would never happen again. And so we developed, obviously, intelligence capabilities. We developed capabilities on the military side. I think a lot of the intelligence capabilities that were out there were designed to try to make sure that we wouldn't repeat the mistake that happened prior to 9/11. and that we would be able to have the intelligence agencies talking with each other, sharing key information, and being able to determine whether or not terrorists were planning attacks on our country. And I do think that some of the intelligence that's been gathered has been helpful in avoiding some of those important attacks. The key here is obviously to make sure that we do it in compliance with the law, and that the Congress provides careful oversight, and that we do it in a way that in which the laws of this country support that effort. Now, part of the key here is every time you provide those opportunities, you've got to be careful that someone might abuse those opportunities, and I think that's what creates the concern, to make sure that we have enough checks and balances in the system to ensure that that's not happening. But I think we have to be very careful not to do away with some of the important intelligence we do need in order to ensure that we protect this country, and do it in a way that obviously is transparent and that does protect our rights. I mean, I do think that there are steps that can be taken by the Congress to provide more transparency, to provide better checks and balances in the system. But it has to be done on the basis of ensuring that it does not undermine our intelligence capability to be able to protect this country.
As CIA director, did you ever authorize any surveillance of American reporters?
No.
Mm-hmm. Either of you, do you think that national security leaks can be good for the country? For example, if we go back to 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin, basically that was the pretense for escalating in Vietnam. We found out later through the Pentagon Papers that really wasn't merely an unprovoked attack on an American vessel, that we had some role in orchestrating that. And I wonder if you look at situations like that, look at leaks that might have disclosed serious questions about whether weapons of mass destruction existed in Iraq, aren't those good for the public?
It's hard to deny history, and the history you just outlined. I think, Andy, Leon and I stood backstage and said, we got to find some things we disagree about, and maybe we can disagree on this. We're working up to it. But Leon, he laid it out so wonderfully and so comprehensively that we can find this balance. I think the intelligence community, particularly in the guise of the NSA, has overreached for many of the right reasons, many of the good reasons. And I think the American public's been in the dark, and we ought to have more transparency. But back to your question, I think the way in which you don't have that question asked over and over again, are leaks good for the country, is if you declassify more information, if there's more transparency, if there's a limit to what the intelligence community surveils.
That has failed repeatedly.
And I think, by the way, Edward Snowden ought to come home, make his case. The Russians ought to extradite him. That's put a lot of tension in our relationship. He should come home, make his case, and if he has the status of some of the people you've alluded to, Daniel Ellsberg for one, I think the public would get behind him. But I think he undercuts his case by having run to a country that isn't on our list of close allies.
Do you personally view him as a traitor or a whistleblower?
I let others make that determination, but I find him somewhere in between. If he comes home and stands his ground, then certainly he has every right to characterize himself as somebody who was doing what he thought was right. We've had Americans do that throughout history, who at the time were seen as unpatriotic, traitorous, undercutting America's society's
You just said that you could sort of see it both ways. What's the whistleblower part of it? Look, what I would love to see the intelligence community do is be much more transparent in ways that don't affect our methods and sources. And I think it would make it more difficult in the future for a Bradley Manning or an Edward Snowden to feel somehow that what we're doing as a society and as a government conflicts with what we have in our Bill of Rights and in our principles. So I think that we all share some responsibility, I believe, for how we share
what our intelligence capabilities are and how we're collecting, not just on Americans, but on the rest of the world.
Now,
And that's, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Listen,
go ahead.
Yeah.
I think you got to be careful here. I mean, I don't consider Snowden a hero. I think he's a traitor. This is a person. Let me tell you why I say that. I mean, you know, the fact is when you have that kind of very sensitive intelligence, and he had access to a lot of intelligence, and he's obviously, you know, there are an awful lot of documents that he took out. We don't know. He's releasing them. I guess they're releasing them a little bit at a time. But that information jeopardizes people's lives. I mean, we go through the process of, you know, we've got people out there who are in very sensitive positions, who are gathering information and intelligence. And this kind of information, when it's released, you know, could jeopardize people in those positions. That's dangerous. That means that people could lose their lives because of what he's doing. He also has an obligation, working in those jobs, not to do that. Not to do that. There are other ways to reveal that information. He could have gone to Mark Udall. He could have gone to people in the Congress and done it like a whistleblower. Whistleblower has protections to do, but he didn't. So this guy has to face justice. He's, you know, he ought to. I mean, by the way, he winds up going to China. Thank you. Then he goes to Russia. Thank you. And now he's staying in Russia. You know, he's bitching about rights and freedoms. You know, he's going to Russia, for God's sakes. So, you know, you want to make your case? Come back in a court of law in this country and make your case.
Senator Udall, you have been critical of the NSA for not being as forthcoming about its programs of surveillance.
Yes.
And I wonder if you look at, notwithstanding the fact that he violated the terms of his agreement and his pledge to the country, do you see any value in the fact that the disclosures of Snowden have provoked a national debate on something that has caused you concern?
There's a conundrum there, of course, and I, along with Senator Wyden, was aware for a number of years of particularly the metadata program, the so-called Section 215 program, where the NSA collects every day phone records of almost every American. Not content, and I want to be clear, but the phone records, where you called from, for how long, who you called, that sort of thing. And I made the case as much as I could have, given my oath of office and my obligation, as Leon just put it, to respect the security apparatus and the activities of the federal government per the law. However, if Edward Snowden hadn't come forward, I'm not sure we would be having this debate. Hence my reply to your question, is he a hero or is he a whistleblower? I don't know. History will determine. But he ought to come back, stand trial, leave Russia, and make his case, as Leon put it, in a court of law. Because there are laws that cover this sort of thing. But my point going forward is that if we create more transparency and we are even more careful than they are now, and when we hire contractors as well as government employees in the intelligence community, and we give the American public the clear sense that we're being as transparent as we possibly can, and we're not running operations that violate their privacy and call the Fourth Amendment into question, that it's less likely you'll have Edward Snowdens or Bradley Mannings in the future. That's the case I'm making, and I think it's a case that's a strong one, quite frankly.
Good. I am told in my ear that we are nearing the end. You both have an opportunity to say a few things for a couple minutes. Do you have any closing remarks?
Closing remarks. Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me here in Denver. It's been a real treat, and thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to be here. Look, I'm the son of Italian immigrants, and my parents came here like millions of other immigrants without any money or skills or language ability. But I used to ask my father, why did you travel all that distance to come to this country? And my father used to say the reason was because your mother and I believed we could give our children a better life. I think that's the American dream. I think that's what all of us want for our children, is to give them a better life. And I think that is That is the main responsibility of public service and people we elect, is to ensure that this country continues to give our children a better life. And the only way that can be accomplished is if members of Congress and if our elected leaders are willing to govern and to make sure that we remain a government of, by, and for all people. Thanks very much for having me.
Got a few minutes, Senator?
Leon Panetta is a true patriot. As I said earlier tonight, my only beef with him is he looks younger than the last time I saw him, because he's moved to California, where he's famously said he raises walnuts, so he deals with another kind of nuts in California than he did in Washington. But his story resonates with me. My mother was a Coloradan whose father, my grandfather, was a successful cowboy in the day. He died in 1950. He was age 85, so he bridged a number of generations. My father was a Arizona Mormon, and both of my families on my mother and my father's side came to America for opportunity, for freedom, for all the reasons that we're so proud to be Americans. The title of the panel tonight, the forum, was U.S. Leadership Shaping Global Security. And I want to leave you just a couple of thoughts in that regard. I think it's the Pakistanis who talk about us and say the Americans have the watches, but we have the time. But I'm going to beg to differ with them. We may be lacking in patience because we're a young nation, but we have a lot of persistence. And we need to be persistent, and we need to learn to be more patient. And we will continue to lead the world and shape it. We're not going to direct it or demand or be perhaps what we were 30 years ago, because the world's changing for a lot of good reasons. There are a lot of democracies rising. There are a lot of great economic stories. The world's actually a safer place statistically. But we're going to shape the world and create more security through the power of our moral point of view, through our economic strength, through our military, through our political example. And I think I said earlier tonight, for me, the Bill of Rights is where it all starts. It's the biggest, baddest weapon that we have. And when you combine that with the power and the commitment of the American people, the sky's still the limit. And where I really get that inspiration, Leon, and I want to get it in Washington, we're going to find our way, but I get it when I come home to Colorado. I want to thank you for being so thoughtful and kind and appreciative of the great people of Colorado, because we got the best doggone state in the country. We may be landlocked, but we pay attention and we're engaged. And I want to give you the last word again, because it's great to have you here. So thanks everybody for including me tonight. Give him the last word.
Let me end with that. When my father planted a walnut orchard, and we had walnuts, and we used to go around to the pole and hook and shake the walnuts, and my brother and I used to collect the walnuts underneath the trees. When I got elected to Congress, my father said, "You know, you've been well trained to go to Washington, because you've been dodging nuts all your life."
Let's give a big hand to our wonderful speakers. Secretary and Senator, thank you very much. And to our great sponsors that made this evening possible. And I invite each and every one of you to come to the cell and make sure you see this fabulous exhibit, which is very, very important on today's times. Thank you again. See you after the first of the year.